To be oneself is the greatest task and the greatest despair. Søren Kierkegaard's words capture a truth that psychology has long explored: the human struggle of identity. When we hear the phrase, "be yourself," it sounds simple, even comforting. But in reality, it is one of the most difficult and lifelong challenges. Every human being is born into a world where expectations, rules, and roles already exist. Before we even begin to understand who we are told who we should be, by parents, by culture, by religion, by school, and later by society at large. The sense of self is shaped, sometimes nurtured, but often pressured and distorted by these external voices. And so, the task of truly being oneself becomes not a natural state, but a journey that involves conflict, doubt, and often despair. Psychology tells us that identity develops in stages. Erik Erikson, a psychologist who studied human development, explained that adolescence is the key stage when people face what he called identity versus role confusion. At that age, young people begin asking questions: who am I? What do I stand for? What path should I take? These questions don't always have clear answers. And yet, even in adulthood, the struggle continues. Many people settle into roles that feel safe, socially acceptable, and predictable. But deep inside, they sense a distance from their true self. This inner tension is exactly what Kierkegaard meant by despair. Not a temporary sadness, but the deep unease of living a life that is not fully your own. Think of someone who grows up in a family of doctors, where it is expected that the children will also become doctors. The child may love art, may feel most alive when painting, but learns that pursuing this passion will disappoint the family. Out of fear of rejection, they comply. They study medicine. They become the person others want them to be. On the outside, this life looks successful, but on the inside, something is missing. The individual feels restless, incomplete, perhaps even empty. That emptiness is the despair Kierkegaard spoke of, the despair of not being able to live as one's authentic self. Psychology today describes this as incongruence. When the person you are inside does not match the person you present to the world. Carl Rogers, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, believed that psychological well-being comes from living authentically. He emphasized the importance of congruence between the self we truly are and the self we show to others. When these selves align, we feel whole, but when they don't, we feel anxious, depressed, or disconnected. And yet, achieving this congruence is not easy, because society rewards conformity. We are praised when we fit in, when we meet expectations, and when we follow the paths others have paved for us. To go against this is to risk judgment, rejection, or even loneliness. This is why Kierkegaard described being oneself as the greatest task. It requires courage to step outside of what is safe and known. But why the greatest despair? Because the fear of being rejected for who we truly are is one of the deepest human fears. Psychologists know that belonging is a core human need. From early childhood, we seek approval and acceptance, first from our parents, and later from peers and communities. To risk losing that by being different feels unbearable. And so, people hide parts of themselves. They live with masks. They avoid their real desires. They pretend. The longer this goes on, the more disconnected they feel from life itself. Some even forget what their authentic self is, because they have spent so long playing roles for others. This loss of connection to one's own self is the essence of despair. Consider a man who stays in a career he hates because it provides financial stability and social respect. Or a woman who stays in a relationship where love has faded because leaving would mean facing the fear of loneliness and social disapproval. Outwardly, these choices look rational, but inwardly, they come with a cost. The quiet suffering of knowing you are not living the life you were meant to live. Kierkegaard observed that many people avoid despair by distracting themselves with busyness, with status, or with material possessions. In modern psychology, we call this avoidance behavior. Instead of facing the discomfort of inner conflict, people numb it with distractions, social media, work, consumption, or even substances. The despair doesn't vanish. It hides, waiting in moments of stillness to surface again. Yet the paradox is that despair is not only suffering, it can also be a signal. In psychology, emotions are messengers. Despair, as Kierkegaard saw it, is a sign that we are disconnected from our true self. It calls us to examine our lives more honestly. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Am I living my own life or someone else's? Do my choices reflect my values or just the values imposed on me? This is why the greatest despair can also become the beginning of growth. It is often in moments of crisis, losing a job, ending a relationship, facing mortality, that people awaken to the realization that they have not been living authentically. And from that moment, they may begin the difficult task of becoming themselves. This path, however, requires courage. Psychologists often describe courage not as the absence of fear, but as the willingness to move forward despite fear. To be oneself means to accept that not everyone will approve, that some relationships may change, and that certain comforts may be lost. But it also means gaining something invaluable, a life that feels real, a life that belongs to you. When people dare to be authentic, they often describe a sense of freedom. Even if the road is harder, they no longer carry the weight of pretending. And this shift can lead to greater psychological health, less anxiety, more self-respect, deeper fulfillment. But being oneself does not mean ignoring all external influence or living in isolation. Psychology recognizes that identity is shaped in dialogue with others. The key is balance. We cannot avoid relationships, responsibilities, and cultural influences, but we can learn to navigate them without losing ourselves. This means setting boundaries, recognizing when we are compromising too much, and making deliberate choices about what values we want to adopt and which ones we reject. The task is not to cut ourselves off from the world, but to engage with it authentically. Real-life examples show this struggle everywhere. The teenager who hides their true interests because of peer pressure. The adult who stays silent about their beliefs in fear of workplace judgment. The parent who gives up personal dreams entirely for the family. Each of these choices reflects the tension between self and society. And each shows why Kierkegaard's statement still feels so relevant today. In fact, modern psychology might say that the epidemic of anxiety and depression in our world is partly linked to this very issue. The difficulty of living authentically in a world that constantly pressures us to conform. At its core, to be oneself is not about selfishness or ignoring others. It is about honesty. It is about recognizing what gives life meaning for you and having the courage to live in alignment with that. It does not mean every day will be happy or easy, but it does mean that life will be real. When people reflect at the end of their lives, they rarely regret not following more rules or pleasing more people. They regret not having lived authentically. They regret the times they silenced their true desires out of fear. Kierkegaard called it the greatest task because it requires a lifetime of effort, and the greatest despair because failing to attempt it leaves one empty. But psychology also shows us that even small steps toward authenticity can reduce despair. Saying no when you mean no. Choosing a path aligned with your values, even if it takes longer. Allowing yourself to admit what you really feel, at least to yourself. These small acts accumulate into a life that feels more genuine. So, to be oneself is to face the inner conflict between fear and authenticity, between comfort and truth. It is not a single moment, but an ongoing process. And while the despair is real, it is also the doorway to growth. The task may be the hardest one we ever face, but it is also the only one that makes life worth living. Settings: use only generated images. Use a male clear American voice for the narrator.